Have you ever noticed how a single sentence can stay with you for years? Not always the kind words either. Sometimes it's the careless remark someone made in passing, the sharp edge of a joke that landed wrong, the silence that should have been filled with honesty but wasn't. These words settle into the body like small stones. You carry them without meaning to. They shape how you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. Right speech is not about perfection. It's not about never making a mistake or finding the flawless thing to say in every moment. It begins somewhere quieter than that. It begins with noticing what happens in the space between feeling something and saying something. That small gap. Most of the time, we don't even know it's there. A thought arises, an impulse to speak, and the words are already out. But if you've ever caught yourself mid-sentence and thought, "Why did I say that?" you've already touched the edge of this practice. Think of speech like water moving through a landscape. Water doesn't decide where to go. It follows the shape of the ground beneath it. If the ground is worn into old channels, the water flows there automatically. Our speech is like this. It runs along patterns we've carved over years. Patterns of defensiveness, patterns of pleasing, patterns of filling. Silence because silence feels unbearable. Patterns of sharpness when we feel small. The water doesn't judge the path. It simply flows. And we speak the way we've always spoken until something invites us to notice. Right speech invites us to see those channels clearly, not to shame ourselves for them, not to pave them over with forced positivity, just to see. When you feel the urge to speak, where does it come from? Is it from wanting to be heard, to be right, to defend, to soothe your own discomfort? Is it from care, from honesty, from the wish to cause less harm? These questions are not tests. They're simply a way of paying attention. You might try this now if you like. Bring your awareness to your breath, just one breath, moving in and out. Notice the small pause at the end of the exhale before the next breath begins. That pause is always there, quiet and patient. Speech has pauses like this too, though we often rush past them, between hearing something and responding, between feeling hurt and speaking from that hurt, between wanting to say something kind and finding the words that land kindly. The pause doesn't have to be long, just long enough to feel what's true. The Buddha spoke about right speech as part of a path, not as a rule handed down from above. He described it in simple terms. Speech that is true, speech that is helpful, speech that is kind, speech that brings people together rather than driving them apart, speech that is timely, offered when it can actually be received. These aren't commandments. They're observations about what happens when we speak with awareness instead of on autopilot. But here's what makes this difficult. Speaking with awareness means feeling what we're about to say before we say it. And sometimes what we're about to say comes from pain, from fear, from the desperate need to be seen or understood. If we paused long enough to feel that, we might also feel how much we're hurting, how much we want to lash out or hide or say something just to fill the terrible weight of not knowing what to do. The practice doesn't ask us to suppress that. It asks us to know it's there, to let the water show us the shape of the ground. When speech flows from awareness, it doesn't mean every word is gentle. Sometimes honesty has edges. Sometimes boundaries need to be clear. But there's a difference between words that come from seeing clearly and words that come from the need to wound because we've been wounded. You can feel that difference in your body. One tightens, one opens, even when it's hard. Right speech is an invitation to become curious about this difference, to notice when your throat tightens before you speak, to notice when words rush out to cover something you don't want to feel, to notice when silence itself is a kind of speech and whether that silence is holding space or withholding presence. None of this is easy, but it is possible to begin exactly where you are with the next thing you say or choose not to say. You drop a stone into still water and watch the rings move outward. Each circle touches the next, spreading farther than you thought a single stone could reach. The water was quiet before. Now it holds the shape of what you did. Speech works this way. A word leaves your mouth and moves into the world. It touches the person in front of you. Then it touches what they say next, and what they feel when they're alone later, and how they speak to someone else the following day. You don't see most of this. You only see the first ring, if you see anything at all. But the water keeps moving. Most of us speak the way we breathe, without noticing. The words come because something in us wants to be heard, or because silence feels uncomfortable, or because we think we know what should be said. We speak to fill space. We speak to defend. We speak to prove we were right, or to show we understand. And we almost never feel what happens in the moment before the words arrive. There is always a moment before. A tightness in the throat, a heat in the chest, a small pressure that says, I need to say this now. That pressure is not the same as wisdom. It's not the same as care. It's just energy looking for a way out. And if we don't notice it, we let it choose our words for us. The Buddha said that words have the power to both destroy and heal. He did not say this as poetry. He meant it the way you'd mean that fire burns or water cools. Words do something. They land in another person and change the shape of what's there. A harsh word can close a heart for years. A kind word can open a path someone thought was gone. And the strange thing is that the same truth can do either, depending on how it's spoken. When words are both true and kind, they can change our world. Not because they're magic, because they come from a different place. They come from the part of us that sees clearly and also cares what happens next. That part does not rush. It does not need to win. It feels the weight of what it's about to say and checks, will this help? Will this heal? Or will this just be another stone I throw without watching where it lands? Before speaking today, pause and feel the impulse to speak in your chest or throat, not as a rule you follow, as something you get curious about. What does it feel like, that moment before words? Is there tightness? Is there heat? Is there a small pinching, like a fist trying to hold onto something? You don't have to fix it. You don't have to make it go away. Just feel it. Just notice that speech begins before sound. When you start to notice, you see how often we speak from reaction. Someone says something and we feel a sting, and words come fast to sting back. Or someone misunderstands us and we feel a flare of frustration, and we speak to correct them, but the correction has an edge. The edge is the unnoticed part. The edge is what we didn't feel in our throat before we spoke. You can speak the same true thing two ways. You can say, that's not what I meant, with coldness, and the other person hears, you're wrong, and I'm annoyed. Or you can say, that's not what I meant, with softness, and they hear, let me try again. The words are the same. The rings in the water are not. This is not about perfection. You will speak from reaction sometimes. Everyone does. The practice is not to become someone who never makes a mistake. The practice is to become someone who notices the impulse, feels it in the body, and sometimes, just sometimes, chooses to wait. To let the heat cool a little, to let the fist unclench, and then to speak from what's left when the reaction fades. What's left is usually simpler, it's usually softer, and it's usually enough. Speech begins in the body before it reaches the mouth. It begins in a flutter of energy, a small storm of wanting or defending or needing to be seen. If you meet that storm with awareness, it changes. Not because you suppress it, because you see it. And when you see it, you have a choice. You can let the storm speak, or you can wait until the water is still again. Then you drop your stone with care. Then you watch the rings and know what you have done. You know the feeling. Someone says something, and before they've even finished, your reply is already forming. Or you're sitting across from someone who's hurt you, and the air between you fills with heat. The words are right there, lined up and ready. They feel justified, they feel necessary. And then they're out, and something has changed that you can't quite take back. We think of speech as something that happens in the mouth, but it begins much earlier. There's a moment before the tongue moves when something stirs inside. A tightness, a heat, a need to be right, to be seen, to defend, to correct, to fill the silence. This stirring is craving. Not always for something pleasant. Sometimes it's craving for relief from discomfort. Sometimes it's craving to push something away. But it moves fast, and we rarely see it. The Buddha spoke of right speech as part of the path, and he was specific. He said to observe the arising of intention before the tongue moves. This is where freedom lives. Not in perfecting what we say, but in seeing what pushes the words out. If we can catch that moment, we have a choice. If we miss it, the words choose themselves. Think of a kettle beginning to boil. At first the water is still. Then small bubbles form at the bottom. The heat is building, but nothing has erupted yet. There's a moment when you can still lift the kettle off the flame. If you wait too long, the whistle blows, the steam rushes out, and the choice is gone. Speech works the same way. The heat builds, the pressure rises, and if we're not paying attention, the words pour out before we've even decided to speak. Most of us live just past that moment. We become aware of our speech only after it's already moving, sometimes only after it's done. We hear ourselves mid-sentence and think, "Why did I say that?" Or we finish speaking and feel a sinking in the chest. The harm is already out there, traveling towards someone else, but the Buddha's instruction points to something earlier. Before the sentence, before the first word, before the mouth even opens, there's a flicker, a small movement in the mind, an urge, a wanting. If you can feel that, you're standing in the space where freedom actually exists. This doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It doesn't mean swallowing your truth or pretending everything is fine. It means noticing the difference between responding and reacting. Reacting happens when craving moves faster than awareness. Responding happens when you see the craving, feel it fully, and then choose. The kettle beginning to boil doesn't stop being hot just because you've noticed it. The heat is real, the feeling is real. But now you know it's there. You can feel the temperature rising. You can see the small bubbles forming. And you have a moment, brief but real, to decide what happens next. So here's the practice, and it's simpler than it sounds. 3 times today, notice when you want to speak and choose to wait one breath instead. Not because you're censoring yourself, not because speech is bad, but because you're learning to feel the difference between impulse and choice. It might be in a conversation that's moving fast. Someone says something that sparks heat in your chest, and the reply is instant. Right there, before you speak, take one breath. Feel what's happening in your body. Notice if there's tightness, if there's a rushing forward, if there's a need to defend or correct or win. Just one breath. Then speak, if you still want to. It might be when you're about to fill a silence. Silence can feel uncomfortable, and we often speak just to smooth it over. Notice that urge. One breath. Feel the discomfort of the quiet. See if the words are truly needed, or if they're just covering something you don't want to feel. It might be when you're about to say something critical, even if it's disguised as helpful. There's often a small edge in these moments, a subtle wanting to be right or superior. One breath. Feel that edge. See if it's still there after the breath or if it softens. You're not trying to become silent, you're learning to see what moves you. And in that seeing, the words you do speak will carry less harm. They'll come from a clearer place. Not because you've perfected anything, but because you've made space between the heat and the steam. We speak to fill the space between us. When someone finishes a sentence, we rush in with our own. When silence appears at the dinner table, we reach for weather, for news, for anything that covers the gap. We have learned to treat quiet as a problem that words must solve. But what if the space itself holds something we keep missing? In music, the silence between notes is not empty. It gives shape to what came before and prepares the ground for what follows. A melody without pauses becomes noise. The rest is not absence. It is part of the song. Our speech works the same way, though we rarely let it. We pack our conversation so tightly that nothing can breathe. We answer before the other person has finished thinking. We plan our response while they are still speaking. We believe that filling every moment with sound is the same as being present. It is not. There is a teaching that asks us to find out what the most important thing is, not in theory, not as philosophy, but right now, in this moment, in this exchange. Sometimes the most important thing is to let the other person feel what they feel without rushing to fix it. Sometimes it is to admit we do not know. Sometimes it is simply to stop and listen, not to the words only, but to what moves beneath them. And sometimes the most important thing is silence. Not the silence of withholding, not the silence of judgment or coldness, but the silence that makes room, the silence that says, I am here, and I do not need to fill this moment with my own noise to prove it. We are not taught this. We are taught that good conversation means quick replies, clever responses, smooth transitions. We learn to fear the pause as if it signals failure. But the pause is where understanding lives. It is where we stop performing and start noticing. When you sit with someone who is struggling, notice what happens in your body when they stop speaking. There is often a pull to jump in, to offer comfort or advice or distraction. The discomfort of their pain becomes your discomfort, and words feel like the way out. But if you let yourself stay with that discomfort for just a breath, you may notice something shift. The silence stops feeling like a void. It becomes a kind of listening that goes deeper than ears. This is not about never speaking. It is about learning to feel the difference between words that heal and words that simply cover. Words that heal come from attention. They arrive after we have taken in what is actually here. Words that cover come from reflex, from the need to manage our own unease. Right speech begins with right listening, and right listening includes the willingness to let silence do its work. Think of the space between musical notes again. If a musician rushes through, afraid of the rests, the piece loses its meaning. The listener cannot absorb what has been played. But when the musician trusts the silence, something opens. The notes land differently. They resonate. Your words can do this too, but only if you stop treating silence as something to escape. Today, let one conversation include a pause where you simply breathe and listen. Not as a technique, not as something you do to appear wise, but as an experiment in presence. When the other person finishes speaking, let there be a breath before you respond. Feel what happens in that space. Notice if your mind rushes to fill it. Notice if your body tightens. And then, instead of speaking immediately, just listen. To them, to the room, to what is moving under the surface. You may find that the silence itself begins to speak, not in words, but in understanding. You may notice something in their face or posture that you would have missed if you had jumped in. You may realize that your planned response is not what this moment needs. Or you may simply discover that being with someone does not require constant sound. The pause is not empty. It is full of everything we usually talk over. It holds the other person's experience without rushing to reshape it. It holds your own uncertainty without demanding an answer. It holds the simple fact of two people being alive in the same moment without needing to prove anything. This is not a grand practice. It is small and quiet. But it changes the quality of your presence. It changes what your words can do when they finally come. Because words that emerge from silence carry a different weight. They come from attention rather than habit. They touch what is real. Silence is not the absence of connection. It is connection without the noise of our own need to manage, to fix, to fill. It is the space where we stop performing speech and start offering presence. And presence, it turns out, is what most of us are hungry for. There is a moment that lives between what we feel and what we say. Most of us pass through it so quickly we don't know it's there. Someone asks a question, and the answer is already forming on our tongue. A conversation turns tense, and words arrive like soldiers, armed and ready. We speak from the head, from memory, from the need to be right or safe or understood. But the body, where the feeling actually lives, is left behind. A tree, rooted before it branches, does not sway with every wind. Its leaves may move, but the trunk holds steady. Our words are like those leaves. When they come only from thought, they scatter. They move in whatever direction the mind is blowing that day, toward defense, toward pleasing, toward filling silence. But when speech is rooted in the body, in what we actually feel beneath the thinking, the words grow from something solid. The teaching is simple. When the body is calm, speech becomes clear. When the body is agitated, words scatter like leaves. This is not a metaphor, it is something you can test in your own life. Notice what happens when you speak while your chest is tight, your breath shallow, your shoulders pulled up toward your ears. The words come fast or sharp or tangled. They may be true in content, but they do not land cleanly. Now recall a time when you spoke from a place of steadiness. The body was settled, the breath was even. What you said matched what you meant. The other person could hear you. We are not taught to check the body before we speak. We are taught to think first, to choose our words carefully, to be polite or persuasive. These things have their place, but they are branches without roots if the body is not included. You can rehearse the perfect sentence and still deliver it in a way that wounds, because the feeling underneath the fear, the frustration, the need to control is louder than the words themselves. This is why right speech begins before the mouth opens. It begins in noticing where you are, not what you think, but what you feel. Not the story about the conversation, but the actual sensations present in this moment. Is there tightness? Is there heat? Is there a pulling away or a leaning in? The body knows what the mind is still deciding. Before an important conversation, place one hand on your belly and take 3 breaths. This is not a ritual. It is a return. The belly rises and falls without your permission. It does not argue or plan. It simply breathes. When you place your hand there, you are asking the body to come forward. You are saying, I will not speak from thought alone. Let me feel what is true first. The first breath is often shallow. The second begins to lengthen. By the third, something softens. It may be small, a slight drop in the shoulders, a loosening in the jaw, but it is enough. Enough to root the tree before it branches. What happens next is not forced. You do not manufacture calm. You do not paste on serenity. You simply notice that the body has steadied even a little, and you let your words come from that place instead of from the rushing mind. The difference is subtle but unmistakable. Speech that arises from a calm body carries less static. It is easier to hear, easier to receive. The other person may not know why, but they sense it. Something in your tone, your pace, the spaces between your words. It all says, I am here, I am not attacking, I am not performing. I am speaking from what is real. This does not mean you will always say the right thing. Right speech is not about perfection. It is about honesty that does not harm. And honesty begins in the body, where feelings live before they become sentences. When you speak from that ground, even difficult truths can be offered without wounding. Not because the words are softer, but because they are clearer. They are not tangled up with what you wish you felt or what you think you should say. They are simply what is. The body is not an obstacle to clear speech, it is the ground of it. When you learn to pause, to place your hand on your belly, to take 3 breaths before you speak, you are not delaying, you are arriving. You are letting the roots deepen so that what grows from them can hold steady in the wind. There is someone in your life about whom you carry a fixed story. Maybe it's a friend who always disappoints, a parent who never listens, a co-worker who takes credit, a partner who withdraws. The story feels true because you have evidence. You remember the times it happened. You can list the moments that confirmed what you already knew. But a river never holds the same water twice. What you see when you look at flowing water is not a single thing. It is a continuous arriving and departing. The shape seems steady, but everything within it is moving. You call it by one name, yet nothing in it remains. The same is true of the person you have named and fixed in your mind. When you say someone is a certain way, you are not describing them in this moment. You are repeating a conclusion you reached before, maybe last month, maybe years ago. That conclusion became a lens. Now when you look at them, you see through the lens instead of seeing them. The story you tell becomes the only story you can see. This is not because you are cruel. It is because the mind seeks continuity. It wants to know what to expect. It builds a map of who people are, so it does not have to start over each time. The map is useful, but the map is not the territory. And when the map becomes more real to you than the person standing in front of you, something is lost. Right speech begins before words leave your mouth. It begins in the moment you form a thought about someone. If that thought is old, if it is borrowed from the past, it will shape what you say. And what you say will reinforce the wall between you. The teaching here is simple but not easy. Every being is fresh in this moment. The person you think you know is not the same person they were yesterday, not because they have transformed in some dramatic way, but because they are alive, because they are moving through experience just as you are. The stories you carry about them are ghosts. They are echoes of past encounters preserved and repeated until they seem solid. You might notice this most clearly with someone you have known a long time, a sibling, a parent, an old friend. You speak to them, and before they finish their sentence, you already know what they are going to say. You already know what it means. You already know who they are. But do you? Or are you meeting a memory? The river metaphor is not just poetic. It points to something you can observe directly. Sit with someone you think you know well. Listen without referencing what you already believe about them. Notice how quickly the mind supplies context. They always do this. This is just like them. Here we go again. These thoughts arrive so fast they seem like perception. But they are interpretation. They are the old story asserting itself. When you notice one repeated story you tell about someone, you can ask a very simple question. Is this still true right now? Not, was it ever true? Not, is it usually true? But right now, in this moment, is the person in front of you behaving the way your story says they will? Sometimes the answer is yes, the pattern is present. But even then, something shifts when you ask the question. Because asking opens a gap. It lets the moment be new. It allows for the possibility that what you are seeing is not inevitable, that it is not fixed, that it could change, because nothing about a person is as solid as your story makes it seem. Other times the answer is no. The person is not doing what your story predicted. They are softer or clearer or more present than you expected, but you almost missed it because you were busy seeing the ghost instead of the person. This is where speech that heals begins. Not in finding the perfect words, but in loosening your grip on the narrative. When you stop freezing people into the shape of your past conclusions, your words change. They become more curious, more spacious, less like pronouncements and more like questions. You might say less, you might listen more. You might find that the person you thought was always defensive is actually uncertain. That the person you thought never cared is carrying something you did not see. Not because they changed, but because you stopped insisting they stay the same. The river keeps moving. The water that seemed so permanent a moment ago is already gone. And the person in front of you is not who they were when you last looked. They are here, now, as alive and unfinished as you are. When you meet them freshly, without the weight of old stories, something softens. The wall you built with your certainty begins to dissolve, and your words, when they come, carry less harm. Not because you have perfected your speech, but because you have stopped speaking to a ghost. There are words we spoke years ago that still live in the body. Maybe it was something sharp said in anger, or a careless comment that landed harder than we knew. Maybe we saw the other person's face change, or maybe we only learned later what our words had done. Either way, the memory returns. It sits in the chest or the throat. And we carry it, sometimes for years, because we don't know what else to do with it. The Buddha taught that when we speak unskillfully, the first response is simple acknowledgement, not drama, not endless self-punishment. Just seeing clearly, I said that. It caused harm. This is what happened. And then, if it's possible, we make amends. We speak to the person if they're willing. We say what we see now that we didn't see then. But even when that's not possible, even when the person is gone or unreachable or unwilling to hear us, we still have work to do. We still have to learn how to set the weight down. This is where most of us get stuck. We think holding on to regret is a kind of loyalty. We think if we stop punishing ourselves, we're saying the harm didn't matter. So we keep the wound closed. We press on it. We revisit it in the middle of the night. We make sure it never quite heals. But a wound that's kept covered and pressed on doesn't heal cleanly. It festers. It becomes something other than remorse. It becomes shame. And shame doesn't make us more careful with our words. It makes us small and defensive. It makes us either too silent or too quick to justify. Shame doesn't serve the person we hurt. It only serves the part of us that believes we should suffer. What the wound needs is air. It needs to be seen without being pressed. This doesn't mean dismissing what happened. It means letting remorse do its work without turning it into a story about how broken or bad we are. Remorse says, I see what I did, and I wish I hadn't. Shame says, I am the kind of person who does that, and I always will be. One of these is workable. The other is a trap. So the practice is small and specific. You bring to mind one thing you said that you regret. Not the worst thing. Not every regret at once. Just one. Maybe it's recent, maybe it's old. You let the memory come and you don't push it away. You name it silently. I said this. It caused pain. And then you stay. You don't fix it in your mind. You don't rehearse what you should have said. Instead, you just breathe with the discomfort that arises. You let the feeling be there, the way you'd let air reach a wound. You notice where it sits in the body, the tightness in the throat, the heat in the face, the heaviness in the chest. This is not easy. The instinct is to move away quickly, to distract, to explain, to make it smaller than it is or bigger than it is. But you stay. You breathe in, and you know you're breathing in. You breathe out, and you feel the slight softening that comes with the out-breath. You're not trying to feel better, you're trying to feel clearly. There's a difference. And as you breathe, you might notice that the discomfort has texture. It's not one solid thing. It shifts, it rises and fades, it moves. This is important. Because when we believe the feeling is permanent and unchanging, we believe we have to do something drastic to escape it. But if we can feel it as it actually is, moment by moment, breath by breath, we start to see that we can be with it. We don't have to clench around it or run from it. We can let it move through, the way air moves through an open window. If the person you hurt is someone you can reach, and if it feels right, you speak to them. You say simply what you see. You don't over-explain. You don't make it about your own guilt. You acknowledge the harm and you let them respond however they need to. And if they're not ready, or if they're no longer in your life, you still do the inner work. You still let the wound breathe. You still practice speaking more carefully going forward. That's the amends you can always make. The Buddha didn't teach that we should be perfect. He taught that we're human, and humans make mistakes, and the path forward is through clarity and kindness, not through punishment. You don't honor the person you hurt by hating yourself. You honor them by learning, by changing, by letting remorse sharpen your attention without letting shame close your heart. So you sit with that one regret. You breathe. You let the feeling be what it is. And slowly you start to notice the difference between carrying the lesson and carrying the shame. One is light enough to walk with. The other is a stone you were never meant to hold forever. Someone speaks and you feel the impact in your chest, a tightness, a small collapse inward. The words themselves may already be fading, but the body remembers. It braces, it builds a wall before the next sentence even arrives. This is what happens when speech becomes a wound instead of just sound. You might notice it with a partner who uses that particular tone, or a co-worker whose criticism lands like an accusation. Or even a stranger online whose comment you read 3 times, each time feeling it sharpen. The words enter and you become smaller, harder, ready. There is an old Zen image for this. Let the words pass through like wind through a screen. Feel them, but do not become them. The screen does not grab the wind. It does not build a second screen to block the next gust. It simply allows the air to move through, and then the air is gone. But you are not a screen. You are a person with history, with tender places that have been struck before. So, when harsh words come, the body does what bodies do. It protects. The question is not whether you will feel the sting. You will. The question is what happens next. Rain falls on a lake. Each drop makes contact. The surface responds. A small disruption, a brief ring of movement spreading outward. And then the lake returns. It does not hold the shape of every raindrop that has ever touched it. It does not harden against the sky. When someone's words sting today, notice where you feel it in your body, not as an idea, but as a physical fact. Is it your throat, your stomach, the space behind your eyes? Just notice. You do not need to fix it or argue with it. You are simply feeling what is already happening. And then, if you can, soften around it. Not because the words were fair, not because you have forgiven anything, just because holding tightness in your body does not protect you from what has already occurred. The words have landed. The rain has already touched the lake. Softening is not the same as collapsing. It is not agreeing or pretending the words did not hurt. It is allowing the hurt to be what it is without adding a second layer of tension on top of it. The first arrow has struck. You do not need to fire a second one at yourself. This is where equanimity lives. Not in being untouchable, but in touching experience without clinging to it or pushing it away. The lake does not refuse the rain. It also does not become the rain. You might try this once and feel nothing shift. That is fine. The practice is not about immediate relief. It is about learning to be with what is true. The tightness in your chest is true. The impulse to defend is true. The quiet choice to soften, even slightly, is also true. Sometimes the words that sting most are the ones that brush against something you already believe about yourself. Someone says you are careless, and you remember every time you forgot, every time you were late, every small failure you have catalogued. The external voice meets the internal one, and suddenly the words are not just theirs, they're yours too. This is when the screen becomes useful again. Let the words pass through, feel them, but do not become them. You can notice the thought without letting it define the whole sky of your mind. It is one cloud, let it move. Rain falls on a lake, and the surface holds each drop for only a moment. There is no storage, no accumulation. Just contact, response, and release. When you soften around the place where words have landed, you are not pretending they did not matter. You are refusing to let them build a home inside you. You are practicing something very old and very simple, the difference between feeling and fusing. The body will still react, the throat will still tighten. But in the small space between the word and your response to it, there is room. Not much, just enough to notice, just enough to choose not to harden all the way. This is not about becoming someone who never feels hurt. It is about becoming someone who can hold hurt without turning into stone. The lake remains a lake. The screen remains a screen. And you remain capable of feeling without breaking. You may have noticed that some days your words are kind, and other days they are not. Some mornings you speak with patience, and by evening that patience is worn thin. You might wonder why this keeps happening. Why you cannot simply learn the lesson once and carry it forward into every conversation that follows. There is a wish in most of us to arrive at right speech, the way you might arrive at a destination. To cross some threshold and know that from now on your words will always heal and never wound. But speech does not work this way. It is more like tending a garden that grows wild without care. You cannot weed it once in spring and expect it to stay clear through summer. The work returns each day, and the garden asks for your attention again. This is not because you are failing. It is because speech arises fresh in each moment, shaped by what you are feeling, what you are wanting, what you are resisting. The conditions change. Your tiredness changes, your fear changes, and so your words change with them. Right speech is not a skill you master and file away. It is a path you walk each time you open your mouth. Some steps are steady, some are not. Both are part of the path. You might notice this most clearly in the small exchanges. The comment to a coworker that carries an edge you did not plan. The tone with a loved one that sounds sharper than you meant. The silence you choose when speaking up might have mattered. These moments do not mean you have lost your way. They mean you are human, and speech is woven into the changing fabric of your inner life. The garden metaphor is useful here because it does not shame you for the weeds. Weeds return. That is what they do. Tending a garden that grows wild without care means you show up again, not because the first effort failed, but because growth and wildness are constant. You pull the weeds that have appeared since yesterday. You water what needs watering today. Tomorrow, the work will be there again, and that is not a problem to solve. It is the nature of a living garden. Right speech asks the same of you, not perfection, not a final arrival, just a return. Each conversation is a new patch of ground. You might begin by simply noticing. At the end of each day this week, recall one moment of speech and observe it without judgment, not the worst moment, not the best, just one. What were you feeling when you spoke? What did you want in that moment? What did your words do? This is not an exercise in self-criticism. You are not looking for what you did wrong so you can fix it. You are looking at the conditions that shaped your speech. You are learning to see the garden as it actually is, not as you wish it were. Some days you will notice that you spoke from tiredness and your words were short. Some days you will notice that you spoke from fear and your words were defensive. Some days you will notice that you spoke from ease and your words made space for someone else. All of this is information. All of this is the ground you are tending. When you see the pattern without judging it, something shifts. You are no longer trying to force yourself into a shape that does not fit the moment. You are working with what is actually here. And that is where change becomes possible. Not because you have mastered right speech, but because you are meeting it as it arises, again and again, with a little more awareness each time. The teaching is simple. This is not a destination. It is a path you walk each time you open your mouth. And the path does not end. That might sound discouraging at first, but there is a kind of relief in it too. You do not have to get it right forever. You only have to meet this moment, this conversation, this choice of words. The garden will grow wild again. That is what gardens do. And you will return to it, not because you failed to tend it well enough before, but because tending is the practice. The return is not a setback. The return is the path. When you stop expecting yourself to arrive, you might notice that the work becomes lighter. Not easier, but lighter. You are not carrying the weight of all future conversations. You are simply here, with these words, in this moment. And when the moment passes, you will meet the next one. That is enough. It has always been enough. We've been sitting with words for a while now, looking at how they move through us, how they land in others, how they echo long after the sound has faded. You might notice something shifting in how you listen to your own voice. Not the outer voice, but the one beneath it. The impulse that rises before speaking. That small space where choice lives. This isn't about policing yourself. It's not about becoming careful in a tight, anxious way. It's about feeling the difference between words that come from reactivity and words that come from presence. You already know this difference. Your body knows it. There's a quality of openness when speech flows from awareness, and a quality of contraction when it flows from fear or grasping. Sometimes you'll speak unskillfully. The old patterns are deep. You'll say something sharp when you meant to stay soft. You'll exaggerate when simple truth would have been enough. You'll stay silent when speaking might have helped. This is part of the path, not failure, just seeing. What matters is what you do after. Do you harden around the mistake, or do you soften? Do you defend, or do you notice? The practice isn't perfection, it's recognition. And recognition, over time, becomes transformation. Right speech doesn't mean you become bland or passive. It doesn't mean you lose your edge or your clarity. Sometimes the most healing words are firm. Sometimes kindness looks like saying no. Sometimes truth requires courage that feels uncomfortable in the throat. But you learn to feel the difference between discomfort that comes from honesty and discomfort that comes from cruelty, between words that challenge and words that diminish. Your intention becomes clearer, your attention becomes steadier, and slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to hear the speech of others differently too. When someone speaks harshly, you might catch the suffering underneath. When someone exaggerates, you might sense the fear of not being heard. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to call it out. Just seeing it softens something. This is how speech becomes part of the whole practice, not separate from meditation or ethics or understanding, all of it woven together. The way you speak reflects the way you see. The way you listen shapes the way you speak. And all of it returns to this simple fact: we are here together, affecting each other word by word, breath by breath. You don't have to carry this as a burden. You don't have to monitor every syllable. Just bring some attention to it. Notice when words create connection and when they create distance. Notice when they ease suffering and when they add to it. That noticing is enough. It does its own work. If you'd like to continue exploring these threads, there are other reflections waiting. No urgency. They'll be there when you're ready. For now, let the concepts fall away. Come back to the body. Feel where you're sitting or lying. Notice the weight of your form against what supports it. Let your attention rest there for a moment. Just the simple fact of physical presence. Now the breath, not controlling it, just feeling it. The coolness as air enters, the warmth as it leaves, the small pause between, the rhythm that's been continuing this whole time, whether you noticed it or not. Let the breath be exactly as it is, shallow or deep, smooth or uneven. It doesn't need to be special, it just needs to be felt. And if thoughts about words arise, about things you've said or might say, let them pass like clouds. You don't have to follow them, you don't have to solve them. Just return to breathing, just return to this, the body breathing. The simplicity of being here, before language, before meaning, before the need to explain anything at all. Rest here as long as you like.